This conference will now be recorded.
Terrific. Thank you, Brian. Welcome, everybody. Beautiful day. We'll try and move through our agenda as expeditiously as possible, but some important information and discussion for today. So we'll go right into public comments. Is there anyone on the line who would like to offer a comment from who's not a formal member of the Joint Committee? All right. Hearing none, we'll go forward to the approval of the minutes from the March 17th meeting. If folks have had a chance to take a look at those, we'll accept a motion.
I make a motion to approve the minutes.
Terrific. Thank you, John. Thank you, John. Thank you, Madam Chair. All those in favor say or signify aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
This is
John
Brenda.
Wright abstains.
Sorry, we got a
Brenda
couple.
Watson. Brenda Watson abstains.
John
Thank you.
Biglione abstains.
Thank you.
John Wright abstains.
Thank you, John. Okay, terrific. Thank you all very much. And now we'll go into a discussion on our clean energy jobs report.
All right, this is Brian. Let me introduce Philip and Sarah from the BW Research Partnership team. But before I do, just want to thank our colleagues at the electric distribution companies, Eversource and Avangrid. We are jointly supporting the second year of the Clean Energy Jobs Report for 2020. And we've been able to work through all of our PSAs with BW Research and amongst each other. And we recently extended the work from the end of the Green Bank's fiscal year, which is June 30th of 2021. So in a few weeks to the end of the calendar year, December 31st of 2021. So that gives us more runway as we'll get into some of the options at the end of today's discussion. So thank you, utility colleagues, for that. So let me turn it over to Philip or Sarah to kind of walk us through.
Great, thank you, Brian, and thank all of you for being here. I'm just going to give a very brief overview and then turn it over to Sarah to walk through the report findings. But as Brian mentioned, we're excited that we have been able to work with all of you at the Green Bank and with the utilities and throughout state government to produce this 2021 Connecticut Clean Energy Report. We are, as in the past, we're conducting a number of deep dive analyses, and our data ties back to the efforts that were begun in 2015 with the U.S. Department of Energy for the National United States Energy and Employment Report, which was first commissioned by then Secretary Ernie Moniz, and is now been, I would say, enthusiastically re-embraced by Secretary Jennifer Granholm in Washington. And one of the key reasons why the Department of Energy has been so excited to be able to continue to do the work over the years is because there's a shared sort of value and use case for states to make good informed decisions about clean energy. Obviously, it was a challenging year for data collection in Connecticut and throughout the state, with a lot of interesting considerations given the sometimes on again, off again feeling of mostly off again feelings that we've had over the last, as I say, the decade that occurred in the last 15 months or so. But we are pleased to have those findings, and we're really grateful that we did this work last year as well, so that we have a good solid baseline over the last number of years to be able to report out. So I think with that, I will turn it over to our project manager and lead author of this report, Sarah Lehman.
Thanks, Phil. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah, and I'll be providing sort of a brief update on this year's Connecticut Clean Energy Employment Report. As Phil and Brian mentioned, we released the baseline study last year, which found that there were just over 44,000 clean energy jobs in Connecticut at the end of 2019. This year's study is quite unique in that it follows on the heels of an unprecedented global pandemic. And so this year's report really highlights the impacts of the economic recession on the state's clean energy sector. Overall, the 2020 data collection effort found that clean energy employment in Connecticut had declined by 6% between 2019 and 2020. So even though we witnessed a net decline in jobs, there is a silver lining to this year's findings and a few things that are important to note. When we asked about their hiring projections for 2021, clean energy employers were very optimistic, projecting about an 8% growth by the end of the year. And this translates to an additional roughly 3,400 jobs by the end of 2021. Another positive thing to note is that despite economy-wide job losses, not just in the clean energy sector, but across other industries as well, the alternative transportation sector actually saw jobs grow in 2020 by about 7% or 130 jobs. Now, we saw this trend both at the state level and nationally. At the same time, clean energy contributions to gross state product increased slightly over 2020 by about 2%. Next slide, please. So compared to the rest of the nation and other clean energy economies, Connecticut's clean energy firms actually fared better than the average. So job losses declined, or clean energy employment declined by about 6% in the state, which is that green bar here on the left. And the overall statewide economy saw job loss of about 7%, which is the blue bar right next to it. Nationally, clean energy jobs declined by 9%, and other states in the region saw declines of about 7 to 16%. So by comparison, Connecticut's clean energy sector actually fared quite well.
Sarah, can I just ask a quick question? Are the definitions among all those states for clean energy jobs the same? We're looking at apples and apples here?
That is a very good question. So they're not exactly the same. They're slightly different, usually with the addition or removal of one or two sub-technologies. Phil, I just saw you turn your video on. Did you?
Yeah.
Jump in?
Yeah, those sub-technologies are quite small. So as an example, like Massachusetts would include only low-impact hydroelectricity in their renewable portfolio standard, whereas Pennsylvania would include all hydro, just as an example. Those segments are quite small, so that while there are some slight differences, the overall sort of takeaway from this is consistent. It would be a fraction of a percentage point if they were consistent.
Just following on that, Philip and Eric's question, just to double check us, I haven't leafed through the report yet, but on the Connecticut side, we do have nuclear in there versus the other states which don't.
I believe that's correct. I will have to double check.
Great, yeah, let's
Yeah,
just.
so Massachusetts and Rhode Island certainly do not include nuclear.
So Connecticut does, nuclear generation as well as nuclear fuels.
Cool, good question, Eric.
Next slide, please. So the slide here is really just meant to highlight the clean energy rebound that we've seen in the data that began in June 2020. So pandemic job losses were really concentrated in March through May. So we can see that big dip from the last quarter of 2019 through the second quarter of 2020, which was about 15% job loss in Connecticut. Since then, however, there's been a rebound or a recovery in clean energy jobs. So we can see that from pretty much the second quarter of 2020 through the first quarter of this year.
Yeah, just to add a little extra point here, we did conduct surveys sort of periodically, though not on a monthly basis, but we did use unemployment insurance filings to understand these impacts. So one of the key takeaways here is that that these job losses would include anything that would qualify someone for unemployment insurance or the pandemic unemployment assistance, which was for many of the sole proprietors. So just as a note there, it's a little bit different of a methodology from the annual report that we use. We're obviously not replicating the full methodology every month or every quarter here, but we were able to track on a monthly basis in Connecticut and did see sort of a sharp rebound. So as the economy reopened, in particular, we saw a pretty sharp rebound in Connecticut.
Next slide, please. So yeah, those slides were really just meant to be a quick overview of this year's Clean Energy Employment Report. The full document has more detail on jobs by technology and sub-technology, as well as demographics, supply chain employment, and a regional county level analysis. We are slated to finalize this main report in just a little over a week, with just a few remaining COVID analyses to complete. And then I believe we'll begin work on the additional set of optional analyses.
Cool. So thank you for that a quick high-level overview. So the report is in the materials. Actually, I've got an updated version of the report that the BW research team sent today, so I'll make sure to get that out to everyone. The next step in that process is taking all the data in that draft report and putting it into the format like we did last year, which is more infographic driven as opposed to kind of text report driven. So we'll do the same thing. Rudy on our team will work with Sarah to get that finalized. Hopefully we can pull that together, Sarah. I would suspect by the fall, but let's check with Rudy. We should be able to pull those things together. You know, the things for us to think about are, one question we had was, do we want to think about moving to the Massachusetts approach in their study, which takes the 5 different sectors that we have, efficiency, renewables, transportation, smart grid, and what else? There's one more, and merges them into 3. I think it's transportation, buildings, and grid, kind of the climate wedges. So that's one. I think, Philip, Sarah, maybe what we can do is we can run the analysis or just kind of compress the numbers to see what it looks like. I guess we don't have to decide that today, but that's one thing that we want to think about. And then the other thing is the BW Research was able to secure funding from the federal government to support the data collection effort. So that's great. Thank you for that, Philip and Sarah. That means then that we have additional resources to support optional analysis. And some of the things that we posed in the statement of work as options were, you know, an economic impact analysis, which so Philip, Sarah, help me out here. I think this was looking at the ripple effects of clean energy jobs and deployment on the economy, if I'm not mistaken. Career profiles, you know, adding to the 10 career profiles that we have, possibly going a little bit deeper in terms of some of those career profiles, like renewable heating and cooling, fuel cells, you know, whatever. We would pick a few, and then doing some specific technology focus areas, renewable heating and cooling, fuel cells. I think we were talking about automation, other things. What am I missing there, Philip, Sarah, anything?
I believe that's covered all the options.
Yep.
I think that's a great idea, and I don't know if solar might be a part of that or not. But any other questions or comments on the report? Okay. Great job. Appreciate the update. And maybe kind of as a segue, as you're thinking about what what things to look at in the coming year, at the risk of incurring John's wrath, there are claims being made about negative impact on clean energy jobs from a bill just passed in the legislative session that, if I understand correctly, would require prevailing wage for even non-governmental clean energy projects. So there are some folks in the clean energy industry that see that as a harmful development and with respect to clean energy jobs. So might be something, might or might not be something. I'll just throw it out there to keep an eye on over there.
Why don't we, Eric, we're going to go to a legislative session update, and we
Right.
can have John speak to Senate Bill 999 on that. And then Philip, I'd ask you to kind of hang around because this is very
Yeah.
much in your bailiwick. So
Yeah, I was just going to ask if it would be okay if I hung around for that discussion. We've looked at some of the data around prevailing wages and project costs, so I'm really interested to listen in if it's all right if I hang on for a little bit.
cool.
Although John or others, correct me if I'm wrong, the effective date of that is not till, is that the one that's not till 2024? Or,
It's sooner than that. I'm not quite sure when, but sooner than that,
okay.
I believe.
So why don't we start there? So we're on the legislative session update, and in the others section, the first item we have here is SB 999, John, on just transition and community investment. Do you want to provide the background on the policy and what it's intended to achieve?
Sure. So the bill was put together by the Connecticut Roundtable on Climate and Jobs that I chair, along with some of the building trades and climate change allies. And originally it had a provision that large scale projects would be, by statute, would be project labor agreements, but that was taken out of the bill after, we came out of the labor committee. So the provisions in the bill as it passed, as I recall them, are that projects over 2 megawatts, which tend to be significant and and not all that many, would come under existing prevailing wage provisions in the state statute. And additionally, that in those projects, with those projects, that the developer would need to enter into a community benefits agreement with the community that the project is being hosted by, and which would include a workforce development component. And so, like, sort of the broad view behind the bill is that, and it's to address just transitions, sort of environmental equity, and also a support for climate change. The feeling is that just like in the 1930s, manufacturing became the way that people came up into the middle class. But originally, manufacturing jobs were really dirty and were really dangerous and were low paid. And it was not until they were organized that they became that vehicle that many of our parents took to the middle class. And what we're seeing is we believe, sort of the driver for the future are green energy jobs, and a couple of things. One is that workers need to be able to see that these jobs are a path to a solid quality of life, and not like a downward slide into low wage kind of Walmart energy jobs. And part of the reason for that is just in and of itself the quality of life for people, but it also, in order to get political support for climate change moving forward, that you can't do it on the basis of declining futures for people, that you just won't get the support of working people for things that for efforts that push them out of good paying fossil fuel jobs or other jobs, but into declining circumstances. The other part of it is that for many years, environmental policy, energy policy, unfortunately, had the worst polluters going into communities of color, and the same people being elbowed out from any chance at the jobs that were created. So we're hoping to kind of reverse that by making sure that people in the community and people that might not have a first shot at these jobs, in fact, are included in the projects. And the Solar Association sort of went nuts on this and made the claim that it would cost the ratepayers $100 million or more a year. This is our math on this is pretty straightforward, which is that labor is about 20% of the cost of the project. And we estimate that the prevailing wage could raise labor costs by as much as 20%. So that basically, when you shake it down, means a possible 5% increase in the cost of a project that there's all sorts of money involved in. We believe that 5% increase is capable of being absorbed without impact on ratepayers, certainly, or consumers, or if there is some impact, that it would be minimal. It is true that that it's not quantified like what the cost of the community benefits agreement or workforce development would be, but our intention is that some standardized approaches be created that are amenable both to the community and to the developers, so that it might be more of a burden than they had before, but in the long run, it creates more sustainable consumers and so lifts the economy in general, which ought to be helpful to everybody, including the solar developers. So that was that is basically the thinking behind the bill and what was passed.
Great summary and background, John. Thank you. Brian, I'm not sure who. Yeah, go.
Could I ask just two questions from that might inform the research side of things? And sorry for my ignorance on this, but the two questions I had is does the bill requiring prevailing wages, and in Connecticut, is that connected to Davis-Bacon Act for the federal prevailing wage for the communities, or does it have its own formula? And then secondly, would it include supply chain companies as well? Meaning, like, if there's a manufacturer in the state that is producing, say, blades for offshore wind, would they be included in the bill as well, or is it just the developers?
This is Brian Farn.
If I can, the second question first is that it does not include manufacturing. So there was, and the only reason I am particularly irked about this is that one of our fuel cell companies, Fuel Cell Energy, made a point of a major opposition to the bill on the basis that it would require them to be an organized workforce or pay prevailing wage, or I don't know, all sorts of henny penny type claims, but it does not impact manufacturers. And I forget what was the other question. Well, whether prevailing wage in the, my understanding is that Connecticut has its own formulas for prevailing wage, but that they probably are not far from Davis-Bacon standards.
That's correct.
But I'm not out of the building trade, so I don't quite know about that. I could find out.
Any, Philip, any observations from your perspective? I'm sure this is an issue that comes up a lot.
Yeah. So I would just say that I think our research, which has not been specific to Connecticut, but has looked in a number of other areas and some look across some representative areas across the United States, would suggest that the kinds of percentages that we're talking about on wages are about in line. So for the larger solar projects, on wages alone, you're looking at a 2 to 3.5%. It's much less for wind because most of those are already being like the offshore wind is largely already being done with project labor agreements, so there's not really much of an impact there. We did look at some battery storage and some other areas as well. The benefits piece of that could make that go a bit higher if benefits are included. So we looked at Davis-Bacon Act wages and benefits, and the benefit add-on to Davis-Bacon Act can be pretty large. So some of the categories went up, to 5.5 or 6% project increases, depending on the size of the projects. If you went from a median wage to a prevailing wage, and you assumed no benefits to the full benefit package from the Davis-Bacon Act requirement. So that would be sort of like a probably inflated and somewhat high end. So given that module prices are continuing to decline, we'll see what happens now with supply chains and everything else, but they've just declined so rapidly over the years. The general consensus with a lot of people that we've been talking to is that this is not necessarily going to be a massive increase that would have to be passed on to consumers. It would be hard for me to find the 100 million from this kind of increase, but that'd be a lot of solar to be installed to get to that 100 million. So generally, the general takeaway that we've seen is fairly sizable, right? Really enormous increases. In some cases, it's 20%. In some occupations, it's more like 30 or 40%. And so really sort of significant wage increases without really tremendous, their costs are costs, right? And so it does increase the cost. There's no way around that, but that there may be some other ways to think about mitigating those, and it wouldn't be tremendously expensive depending on what the actual numbers are. But it certainly seems like this is something we could look at with the data that we have already collected and the information that's available on the median wage data that we collect for our study, and the prevailing wage data that sounds like is pretty easy to access for the occupations. And then we could do some sort of custom analysis on that if that's desirable.
This is Lonnie. Sort of going down that same road, it'd be very interesting because I think, John used the Walmart analogy, and, sort of really understanding that underpaid workers end up on various taxpayer budgets. And it would be it would be interesting to know what those numbers are now, and particularly specific to the workers in the energy industry that aren't making a living wage, that's subsidized housing, that's subsidized healthcare, food stamps, and all the things that, it's not that these costs go away, they end up on a taxpayer budget. So it would be kind of interesting to know that, just in terms of helping to solidify the case that we're making.
Cool. Any final comments on SB 999 before we go back? We'll have Brian work through all the other items here.
Only, Brian, in the context of our role here as the joint committee, I don't think we need to take any more time on it today, but it'd be interesting. Hopefully the EEB will, have a legislative update on their agenda, and it's just something to have the antenna up on. That's all. You might hear some chatter about it in the marketplace. That's all.
Cool. Thanks, Eric. All right, Brian.
Sure. So I'll go through these all real quick, and then because we kind of spent a lot of time on that on SB 999, but not a bad reason, because it's could be an important bill. Energy efficiency retrofit grant program for affordable housing. We are very excited about this at the Green Bank. It establishes a grant program through DEEP and includes affordable housing as residential customers and tariffs. So kind of they're folded into that group. So that's going to hopefully open up, solar to some of these homes or some of these multi-family dwellings. Energy storage was also another big one, 1,000 megawatt target by 2030. You could see this legislation in conjunction with what Pura is doing. You can really see this really leading to a large deployment of energy storage, which will be great for not only homeowners, but grid resiliency. So we're really excited about that. The ECMB board, they're going to get 2 members. I haven't talked to any ECMB members to get their take on it, but it seems like it's probably a good thing. Getting that additional buy-in from those groups is always, I would think, a positive, and getting those additional kind of viewpoints in will be really helpful. From a Green Bank perspective, our big legislative push this year was under the governor's bill, HB 6441. This was expanding the Green Bank beyond clean energy to include environmental infrastructure. You can see that obviously, resiliency, things like that are now areas that we can play in, but we can't in any way use the system benefit charge or the RGGI funds for those types of projects. But we're hoping to use our financing tools and our expertise to kind of play in this space. And you can see, as the impacts of climate change are here today, we're going to be needing to address some of the remedial issues. So really excited about that. We talked about SB 999. That was a bill that, from a Green Bank perspective, we kind of stepped back away from, only because it didn't really play in the energy deployment projects that we're involved in. So kind of wasn't our fight one way or another. And obviously, from our perspective, we have varying viewpoints on our board. So it was kind of one that we're just like, that's not really our policy debate. But I do give John Harity and what they did, I give them a lot of kudos for the hard work they did to get that passed. HB 6106, this was a property tax exemption clarification for renewables. This has to relate to a litigation matter that was going on with a small handful of towns, which is almost resolved, that were disregarding the property tax exemption for third-party owned residential solar projects. And this bill clarified that. HB, which it should be HB 6527, sorry for that typo there. That's the class 3 expansion, which basically increases the size of the portfolio requirements for the EDCs. HB 6412, this bill was raised to require a low carbon fuel blend in heating oil, also establishes a bioheat advisory board in Connecticut. And then lastly, I'll just do HB 6524. This relates to fuel cell solicitation. So obviously, with fuel cell manufacturing being kind of centered in Connecticut, that was something that the legislature thought was very important. So with that, I would feel free to open up to any questions for myself or Brian or anyone. Please let us know.
This is Brian. Let me just add a little bit more. I think this is probably one of the biggest sessions we've seen, probably in a decade, in terms of energy and environmental policy. I think this first bullet here is probably one of the largest things to happen this session. So, a lot of kudos to advocates, on the street pushing this bill, Letitia Colon and others advancing this, working with DEEP and others. We were working with DEEP late in the session to include multi-tenant affordable housing as residential customers underneath the renewable energy tariff. Right before this policy passed, the tariff only applied to single-family 1 to 4 unit homes. So we were advocating for a number of different bid preferences before PURA in the commercial and industrial tariff, but we all felt that if we can get a change in the statute to recognize multifamily affordable as residential, then they wouldn't have to compete nor have a cap in the commercial and industrial tariff, because residential doesn't have a cap. So this is a huge win for solar PV for multifamily. And then obviously on the grant side, supporting energy efficiency, health and safety matters through the other elements of the bill upon which it was originally established. The second part, the energy storage bill, docket 1712 03 RE03, the storage bill. This whole docket really originates out of Lonnie's grid modernization bill from 2015. It's being taken up now in this docket. We'll probably see in the next 2 to 4 weeks a decision by PURA that will have the Green Bank and the EDCs co-administering a battery storage incentive program. So this is great for us to continue working together. More HES jobs, lots of things that overlap with our respective missions. And we'll talk about environmental infrastructure later, but just wanted to emphasize those two up top. Those are really big ones.
Okay. Not sure where in the agenda, Brian, will be hitting the infrastructure, but I'll leave that to you. Any other questions, comments about the legislative session? If not, well, congratulations to everybody that worked on that. It sounds like it was a big year for Green Bank focused initiatives. So great job, everyone involved with that. Okay, next on the agenda is sort of one of our high priority efforts, multi-year efforts here, which is to bring more alignment to the extent our functions allow to the plans of the Green Bank and the Conservation and Load Management Fund. So we're going to get a review and update on that. And I'm not sure who's starting, Brian, but I'll kick it to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Eric. Yeah, I will start off from the Green Bank perspective and then open it up. And then we'll have, I think, Glenn or Richard, the consultants on the EEP side, walk us through the status of the CL&M plan. This in general is kind of like an outline of our quarterly work with respect to the planning processes of both the Green Bank and the Conservation and Load Management Fund programs. So, in March, both of us did an initial take on what we were thinking about looking ahead at the next fiscal year. This month in June, we'll take a little bit deeper dive into where the Green Bank is as we go to our board for review, a recommendation and a review for approval next Friday. And then we'll get a sense from the Conservation and Load Management Plan today. We did have in October the debrief of the legislative session, but I moved it to today because I felt like we kind of know where everything is, outside of what's happening with the special session and the implementer. That what we just shared with you are a lot of items. There may be others, and folks, feel free to chat those in if you see other bills that we may have missed. Let's be sure to capture those. And then in December, it's really looking ahead at the next year. What are our respective plans for legislative session in terms of policies that we're thinking about and any input going into the Green Bank's revisions to its comprehensive plan? That should actually be FY 2022. But we go through that twice a year, our comprehensive plan. So let's jump in to the Green Bank. So we've talked about our comprehensive plan in the past. So this is our guiding document per statute, very similar to the Energy Efficiency Board. So we will include the new targets for fiscal year 2022 following the board's review and approval next week. We'll go through those in a second. A big item here is the phase out of the RCIP. We are nearing the completion of 350 megawatts of completed new residential solar PV projects. So we are now transitioning from a net metering RCIP incentive structure to a tariff-based structure, which will start January 1st of 2022. We are working to include a battery storage incentive program within our comprehensive plan as PURA within the next 2 to 4 weeks issues its interim decision in the docket that I was referring to before. So we will move from being a catalyst in creating, fostering the sustained orderly development of a local solar PV industry to doing the same for a local battery storage industry. So we're excited by that. We'll have various cleanups throughout the document, footnotes, various things. Program alignment with new legislation. So we will try to the best of our ability include the new environmental infrastructure provisions that have been included as a result of passage of House Bill 6441, the governor's bill. Essentially what this does is it broadens the Green Bank's mandate beyond clean energy, which are all the technologies we deal with, you all deal with too, and allows the Green Bank model to apply to environmental infrastructure, which is defined as waste and recycling, water, agriculture, resiliency and adaptation, land conservation, parks and recreation, and other environmental markets, including carbon offsets and ecosystem services. So we will be spending the next year stepping back, having conversations with DEEP, Department of Insurance, other stakeholders in the market to figure out where there are gaps for enabling and catalyzing more private investment to improve environmental infrastructure. We will add new board members to our comprehensive plan. So as a result of the passage of that act, OPM now has a seat on our board. So we have a 12-member board. We will include new impact reporting methodologies that will be going to our board for review next Friday, including, actually it will be going in July, including our vulnerable communities equity methodologies and our energy burden methodologies, all of which will come out in our comprehensive annual financial report that we do every year in the fall. And then John, we will include the glossary of acronyms in that comprehensive plan. So we'll have the staff kind of sift through everything and make sure we're capturing all the acronyms so we have a place to have them. But it's really, yeah, it's really, Green Bank 2.0. We all know that the Green Bank model works. Right now, at a national level, the American Jobs Plan of President Biden includes a clean energy and sustainability accelerator modeled after the Connecticut Green Bank, which does go beyond mitigation and clean energy and includes adaptation and other environmental markets that we're talking about. So we are ready for federal funding to come into Connecticut should that pass. There's lots of bipartisan support in that bill or in the plan. That plan has continued to, from the administration, continue with the inclusion of the accelerator. At every level. When the jobs plan started off at 2.3 trillion, when the president reduced it to 1.7 trillion to get bipartisan support, it was still there. When the president then reduced it again to get bipartisan support, it was still there. So this clearly has the support of the administration and Congress, as well as growing in terms of its bipartisan support. So happy to, if folks want to offline, learn more about that, talk to you about it. Great progress. And again, modeled after Connecticut's Green Bank. It all started here in Connecticut. So here's our targets, our proposed targets for fiscal year 2022. We will be discussing this with the board next week. You can see the RCIP coming down I mean, those were before 50 to 60 megawatt targets. The 4 megawatts here wraps us up in terms of the 350 megawatt goal. Solar for All is just ensuring that we have low to moderate income families participating as part of the RCIP growing percentage. So that's really a carve out of the RCIP. We've included a partial year under battery storage, anticipating that will start January 1st of 2022. Given the targets that Pura is setting through 3 cycles, every 3-year cycles. And then the Smarty loan, really this is pretty much on track with pre-COVID targets. Nothing new there, just trying to get back to some semblance of normalcy. And then on the financing program side, we've got our products that everyone's familiar with, CPACE, Green Bank Solar PPA, a number of targets that we're going after in terms of the solar PPA, the state lead by example, municipalities. We're going to go right after that multifamily affordable housing policy that just passed, and other participants in the market, specifically with that product, those people who've been left out, we're going to be focusing in on. Working closely with our utility colleagues on the SBEA, helping to support small business, energy advantage, multifamily. We've got transportation on here, which is really, if we had a column here on annual carbon CO2, tons of CO2 avoided, it would show up. This is essentially our carbon offset initiative that we've established with a number of EV recharging station owners and developers across the country. We've effectively aggregated thousands of carbon offsets, and we're going to be selling them into the market this year. So this is a target to effectively demonstrate that you can monetize in the EV recharger carbon offset market. And then strategic investments. This is, you don't see any targets here. This is an open RFP process that we have where opportunities come the Green Bank's way, and we take a look at them, and if they are consistent with our goals and targets in our comp plan, we would look at them and then recommend approval to our board. So these are our targets for the year. Lower than we've seen in the past. That's because the RCIP is winding down, but we expect, looking ahead at FY 2023, for battery storage to be in full swing as that policy, begins to ramp up and we see the market ramp up. Let's see. Okay, marketing here. So as I was talking about earlier, just in terms of Green Bank 2.0, we are in a bit of change as an organization. What you're seeing here is our new headquarters. We've moved from Rocky Hill, where we've been for 2 decades. We're now in the Atlantic Works building, an old former brownfield restored manufacturing location right in front of the Capewell Loft. You can see behind us there to the left, that is a mixed affordable housing unit. So this is kind of our community and our values. We are going to live and breathe it and work with the city of Hartford to help Hartford become the greenest city in America. So we're going to live and breathe it all, bringing that into our mission. But from an overall marketing perspective, we look at our marketing budget from 2 perspectives. One is, general operations, and then our products and programs, our financing programs and our incentive programs. In terms of general operations, we're going to be making a strategic shift from, product-focused marketing to brand-level marketing. Again, as we start to look ahead at, not only advancing our financing products that you are all familiar with, but our new mission, broadening our mission, it's going to be important that we begin to establish more trust with other players in the market. We will be doing more contractor outreach strategies. Obviously, contractors are a great channel to the market, so supporting contractors will be a heavier emphasis. Investing in other assets, videos, documentaries, photos that not only connect, our brand to our products and programs, but also the culture of the organization. So we are a mission-driven organization, and our productivity is driven by the passion of our people. So making sure that everything is working in the right direction is going to ensure that we continue to deliver, outperforming results. On our product side, we're going to continue with our solar market assistance program, where we essentially outsource engineering, and we help underserved market participants like municipalities that have been left behind and others to provide them the resources and the process and the financing they need to get solar on their rooftops and start saving money. So we're going to increase that, especially as we're looking ahead at transitioning to the new policy on compensation. Supporting building owner outreach as a product development tool. So again, working directly with building owners, helping them design, whether it's custom solutions for them or whatever, but tying that into our various programs, CPACE specifically, and then or CPACE broadly, and then SBEA with you all specifically. Obviously equity is important to all of us. We now have a 40% target for investment in benefits inuring to vulnerable communities by 2025. So we're starting to pick up our investment in marketing programs to the LMI community. And then lastly, as I was talking about before, battery storage incentives, just getting ready for that. We're waiting for a PURA decision, and then we'll design the marketing program for the battery storage incentive. I think that's it. Why don't I hang out here and take any questions, comments?
Questions or comments for Brian? Brian, as I said at our subcommittee meeting, I think this marketing shift is really important, and really encourage as much dialogue as possible and collaboration as possible with the EEB as well, in terms of brainstorming and sharing consulting services and so forth to find an approach that works well for both organizations. So look forward to seeing that evolution.
Great. Yeah, one of the things you mentioned, Eric, in those conversations was for us to really dig into the analytics and tracking and data collection so that, in a year, 2 years time, we have data to be able to share in terms of the effectiveness of the shift. So that'll be important for our team to, look at budget allocations, the different marketing methodologies, and to be able to demonstrate what works in terms of generating leads, close projects, commission projects, so that we all know better what is going to be the most efficient route to using marketing dollars for getting people to deploy clean energy. So yeah, we'll be right on that, Eric.
Yeah, I know things have evolved, but a while back, I know, when I was with CBIA, I would hear from members, trying to get them excited about this, and they were overwhelmed. And I think they were largely overwhelmed by the products. So I think, sort of shifting to, towards a more broad marketing approach rather than marketing the products right up front. I'll be very interested to see how that works out. I think it's going to be a big plus. Glenn, I see you. Are you set to go?
I am ready. Can you hear me, Eric?
Sure can. Thanks for joining us.
Could we?
I had one question I put in the chat.
Perfect.
On the previous section, is that okay?
Please go ahead, Richard. Yeah.
Brian, yeah, thanks for your presentation at the EEB's Res Committee meeting last week. Really appreciate it. I didn't get a chance to ask you there, so I'll ask you here. Given your focus on batteries on that customer side, just wondering if those are being enrolled in the company's demand response programs, or what the plans are with grid connecting those products.
Great. So great question. I think it's to be determined. So the policy that just passed sets a 1,000 megawatt target. It identifies 3 market segments: behind the meter residential, behind the meter non-residential, and then grid tied systems. PURA has been running a docket now for over a year, docket 1703 RE03. And within their initial straw proposal that came out in January, they identified a 580 megawatt target specifically for behind the meter residential and non-residential, although they did include front of the meter as part of the public comment process. Those programs, at least the behind the meter, would be jointly administered by the EDCs and the Green Bank. There is a lot of conversation around who would retain the rights to the forward capacity payments from battery storage. I think the sense was from at least us as a state agency was that if we are providing an incentive that benefits an end user, then in lieu of that incentive, the state or the ratepayers will retain the right to those credits. But the Puro will rule on that. The program essentially will offer an upfront incentive through the Green Bank, and then an ongoing performance-based incentive, very similar to Connected Solutions in Massachusetts, that would be administered by the utilities. So the utilities would dispatch those systems and deliver, energy savings, peak reduction to ratepayers. So in terms of your question, demand response programs, I would really lean on the EDCs to answer that question, as administrators of the CLNM, and then EEB, the part of the utilities who's going to be administering the battery programs. I'm not sure if they're one and the same.
Okay, great. Thanks for the update.
Good question. Okay, Glenn, it's all yours.
All right, thank you. So as a reminder and to establish context, because it's been 3 months since we've met as a group and have talked about some of this, the CLM programs function on a 3-year planning cycle with annual updates for years 2 and 3. We're currently at the end of our existing 2019-2021 3-year plan, and we are, I'll say, in the midst of our planning cycle for the next 3-year plan covering the 22 to 24 timeframe. In this plan, the EDCs have proposed 3 main focus areas, which in part tie to the existing 7 plan priorities, which we'll review in just a moment on the following slide. But to kind of put things at a higher level, the EDCs have distilled much of what we do and much of what we plan to do into these 3 main focus areas. Energy affordability, at the end of the day, much of what we're doing with the CLM dollars is to provide incentives to customers to undertake efficiency improvements to reduce their bills. And we are certainly aware of energy burdens, particularly in the context of the 3rd bullet, on the issue of equity, being particularly aware and conscious of the need to reduce the energy burden of those who can least afford it. Decarbonization is certainly consistent with the last several years of emerging state energy and environmental policy. The GC3, the previous comprehensive energy strategy, probably in anticipation of the next CES. And decarbonization we're using in a broad context, to include high efficiency, low carbon technologies, as well as demand reduction strategies. We're also certainly looking at the opportunities that new construction affords us. It's probably the best opportunity for us to pursue, a zero carbon pathway at the lowest cost. Trying to achieve carbon reductions in existing buildings is obviously critical and the main focus of what we do, but it typically comes at a higher cost than what we can achieve in new buildings, both residential and commercial. Equity, as Brian has noted, has certainly become an increased focus of all of our activities. As most of you are probably aware, the companies receive a performance management incentive, a PMI, which rewards shareholders based upon the performance of the companies. Most of the PMIs are tied to benefits and net benefits, effectively savings and net savings monetized on a dollar basis, but we also have a series of secondary metrics which are more focused on specific outcomes. And for the first time, we have focused equity metrics for both the residential and CNI sector in our 2021 program year. I will note, somewhat related, we have had a long-standing low-income residential metric, so also highlighting the fact that, the CLN programs have had a long engagement providing services to the residential low-income market, and there's an existing low-income metric which effectively sets a goal of 100% expenditure of the low-income budget on an ongoing basis. And the equity metrics, continue to be a source of discussion. What we have now are certainly useful and appropriate. They differ considerably between the residential and CNI, but reflecting the realities of the differences of those sectors and those markets. As we continue in our discussions, both at the board and the committee level, it's quite possible that the metrics we currently have in place may be expanded, tweaked, or added to. Next slide, please. All right. So these plan priorities have been in place for some time. These were developed to inform our current planning process. We have revisited these in the context of our current planning efforts for the next 3-year plan. And I'll just note at this point, the board has not raised any issues or concerns in regards to whether any of these 7 plan priorities need to be adjusted, tweaked, changed, deleted, modified, or expanded upon. So these will likely continue to be part of our planning documents and part of our considerations in regards to what it is we seek to do and what it is we have influence, the proposed outcomes in the 3-year plan. I'm not going to step through each one of these, but if anybody has a question about one or more of these, please stop me and I can spend a moment more expounding on any or all of them if necessary. Okay, next slide, please. All right. So as I noted, we are well into our 3-year planning process, but at this point, it has mostly been discussions. At the board level, we did have one public input session. We will be scheduling at least one, if not more, probably for July and the coming months. We have an internal draft plan text, which has been shared between the companies and the consultants. It is not yet ready for the light of day, either for the board or for stakeholders. We expect that will occur probably the first week in July, the week prior to the July board meeting, at which point the companies and consultants will have gone through their initial discussions and engagement on the plan text. And I do want to emphasize it's the plan text. That the documents we have received from the companies, are not yet populated with savings tables. So I unfortunately can't share with you, as Brian has, some of the details in terms of proposed, savings by fuel type, by company. Those we will certainly have, for the September joint committee meeting. But we have gone through, a number of fairly detailed discussions, both in terms of sectors, CNI and residential. We've had fairly detailed discussions on the performance management incentive structure, on demand response, on the underlying energy supply costs, which inform our benefit cost model. So we've been setting the stage over the past 6 months at the board and at the committee level, putting the pieces in place to inform the draft plan text, and to inform the budget and savings tables that will emerge, from continued engagement at both the board and the committee level. And just as a reminder, we will, meaning the companies will file, on or before November 1st. So we still have some number of months. From past engagement, they will be fairly heavy engagement on the part of all parties, the board members, the companies, the consultants, as well as stakeholders, and we certainly encourage input from the Green Bank and others as to the activities we're proposing to undertake. Next slide, please. So just a little bit more in terms of maybe getting a bit more in the weeds than either the focus area or the plan priorities, which were shared in previous slides. Just some of the things that are front and center as the companies put together their initial draft text and as the consultants have engaged with the companies. And again, these have certainly been part of conversations that have ensued, well over the past 6 months, probably over the past year. Lighting has been a mainstay of the efficiency programs in the residential sector. As recently as just a few years ago, the large majority of the annual electric savings were coming from lighting. Lighting is largely going to go away in the residential sector, with the likely or possible exception of low income and certain hard to reach to find market areas. C&I lighting will continue to be a significant part of the plan, but that will also transition to more sophisticated control-based network lighting.
Eric, are you there?
Hi, somebody needs to mute themselves, please. Thank you.
Forgive me, it might just be me. I can't hear you.
Oh, can others hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I'm hearing you.
I can hear you.
Chat
All right,
me
thank you. Okay.
next slide when you are there, Glenn. I can't hear for some reason.
Okay. Workforce development has been, is, and continues to be key and growing focus of our efforts. We need to not only continue to improve the services that our efficiency contractors deliver, but as new technologies become increasingly commonplace, or existing technologies garner greater market share, heat pumps is certainly an important case in point, as well as heat pump water heaters. They have long been supported by the programs, but their importance in the plan, in the coming plan, will be even more prominent, and we need to ensure that contractors and others have the skill sets for their proper installation. Yeah. Health and safety barriers has been a continued, and I will say frustrating challenge, particularly on the residential side, where upwards of 20% of homes, and I think even more in the low-income population, have a variety of barriers: mold, mildew, knob and tube wiring, asbestos, vermiculite, etc., that prevent us from fully going into homes and weatherizing them. We have been able to work with DEEP to repurpose funds. If we want to talk in more detail about that, I would defer to either my associate Richard Fasby, who's on the call, who's been engaged in those conversations, or someone from DEEP. But we've been able to identify a pot of money, and DEEP is in the process of pulling together, I believe, an RFP to seek a vendor to assist with the implementation of those funds to address these health and safety barriers. It will not be by any means a complete solution. The number of homes and the dollar amount involved, in barriered homes is, in the tens, if not hundreds of thousands, and we're probably talking hundreds of millions. And the dollar amounts we have available to us are nowhere near that, but it is nonetheless an important first step after years of, not being able to really do much of anything through the CLNM programs. Kind of the counterpoint to, as lighting continues to diminish, particularly on the residential side, we need to continue to look at comprehensiveness and deeper savings. It will mean that our savings activities will be more challenging in many ways. It's a lot harder to weatherize a home than it is to screw in a light bulb. A little bit of a simplification, but it comes down, in large part to that, installing HVAC equipment properly sized, properly installed, making sure that the ducts are sealed, again, is, a lot harder than, a product's, specific effort, focused on lighting. Delivered fuels, propane and fuel oil have been a key part of the residential programs, for quite some time, largely funded through RGGI. Deep clarified and provided, clear direction that the C&I sector also needs to more fully address delivered fuel opportunities, and that will be part of the plan. Those opportunities are probably somewhat fewer, on a MMBTU basis they are in the residential side, but they are there nonetheless. I will also note, circling back to my prior comment about the PMI, the performance management incentives, historically, the two big ones, the benefits and the net benefits ones, which both include savings components, only included regulated fuels, electricity and natural gas. They did not include delivered fuels. And I'll also note, they only included the demand savings associated with efficiency measures. They did not include demand response. Moving forward, they will include delivered fuel savings. So, that will further increase focus on the appropriate and proper delivery of efficiency for delivered fuels. Any question on this before I proceed? Okay. The next two slides. Thank you. These are summary slides of, while we don't have savings by program at this point, or savings, either spending or savings by program. These are the revenue tables for electric and for the gas programs, and by electric, it does include all the fuels that are served by the electric programs. Broken out by the different revenue streams. I'm not going to go into the details for each one, but I do want to note that, in total over the 3 plan years, we're talking about $541 million on the electric side, $165 million on the gas side, for a total of about, $707 million over the 3 years, or about $236 million on average per year. So just a little bit less than $250 million a year. So fairly significant amounts of money being directed to the energy efficiency and demand response efforts. I think that's the end of my slides. And if you could just go to the end just to make sure I haven't left anything out. Yep, okay. So any closing questions or comments on this before we proceed to the next agenda item? Thank you, everybody.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Glenn. And thank you, Brian. Two really good overviews. Any other questions or comments on this? Okay. As I look at our agenda, other business, Brian or Glenn or anyone have any other business you wanted to raise?
Nothing here, Eric.
Okay. All right. Well, then let me, if I may, just take a moment. This is my last meeting with the Joint Committee. I'm not sure how many years it's been, but it's been a great pleasure to be involved in this. I've always felt coming in, and I feel going out, that the state and both of these organizations can really benefit by collaboration and communication and working together. And I'm really happy that as I reflect back on when I started, you know, let me just say I don't think it's where it is now, and that has nothing to do with me. It has to do, I think, with having these quarterly meetings and people getting the kind of briefings like we got today. And I just Brian mentioned Green Bank going into 2.0. I know there's conversations about how to make these meetings more effective and more useful. And I'm glad that those conversations are happening. So maybe we're heading into Joint Committee 2.0 as well. And I'd encourage everybody who's been involved to provide your input on how to make these more beneficial. And lastly, I guess what struck me going through today's agenda, particularly in these planning development, and I know it's hard because you're on different time frames, and you have kind of different statutorily defined assignments, if you will. But I think it's always helpful to kind of try and spot things that overlap each other. Like in today's conversation, both organizations talked about how important equity is going forward. And I know, Glenn, I'm glad you mentioned that the low income has been a big priority for the EEB for many years and continues to be. So it's not necessarily something new. It might be a new label, but it's something that both organizations really care about. And it would be interesting to see if, to what extent both organizations have consistent perspectives on what that means and what they're trying to accomplish and how maybe they can work complementary in that regard. Workforce was another one that came up that, I think we talked about workforce early on with the Green Bank in this one. And obviously I'm delighted, Glenn, to see that on the list for the EEB. So just, I'm just so pleased and proud to have worked with all of you, and as a joint committee, most especially. I've already had my last EEB meeting. My last Green Bank meeting will be later this month. But just in terms of the joint committee, it's been a privilege, and I'll be cheering you on from afar to, keep it up and keep making the great progress. And with that, are there any last items? If not, the next meeting is in September. I don't have the exact date for that. Brian or Glenn, do you have that date? So people can get it on their calendars.
I think it's in the invite, Eric.
Great. Well, there'll be reminders coming up.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, everybody have a great summer, and we'll be talking to you. Take care.